Our monthly community learning calls are designed to highlight the connections between the work of practitioners and the Co-Intelligence Institute's frameworks. This specific call, featured in this video, covers the Austrian Citizens Climate Council, the Klimarat, as presented by two of the facilitators and process designers, Jenna Buchi and Robert Paice. The Citizens Climate Council was organized in response to one of the demands of a petition on climate protection, which collected over 380,000 signatures. It was commissioned by the Ministry for Climate Action on behalf of the Austrian Parliament, and its task was to propose measures to reach carbon emissions neutrality in Austria by 2040. It took place from January to July of 2022 and consisted of 84 randomly selected ordinary Austrian citizens. The Citizens Council came together over 6 weekends with professional facilitators in Vienna and Salzburg, and it learned from scientists, stakeholders and politicians, then deliberated and finally created a series of recommendations which presented to the Austrian Parliament in July 2022. This call takes a deep dive exploration into what happened in the Climate Council from different perspectives. We use the Co-Intelligence Institute's Wise Democracy pattern language to explore its innovative features. Okay, so welcome everybody, a very warm welcome to you to our real world co-intelligence call. And these are community learning calls that the Co-Intelligence Institute is running every month. And in each of these calls, our intention is really to highlight connections between the ideas, the thoughts, the vision of co-intelligence and things that are actually going on in the real world. So we have sort of been looking at various projects and processes and participatory forums that we think, that we have found inspiring, and we have reached out to different practitioners. And this time round, we've reached out to Jenna Buchi and Robert Paice. Excuse me if I pronounce your surnames badly. Who were part of the Austrian Citizens Climate Council that took part this year. So it's a fantastic honor to have them with us today to explore basically everything that they feel is important to share. And we'll, as a group, as a collective, just dive into that and see what we find important, looking through the lens of co-intelligence, wholeness, wise democracy. So warm welcome to everybody, and I'll hand over to Rosa.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that lovely introduction. I am so excited for you to hear from our guests, Robert and Jenna. And before we do that, I just want to give you a little sense of the format of this, which was on the Eventbrite, but still, they're going to be speaking to us, and it's going to be the tip of the iceberg because there is so much, like they could go on for hours, but they're going to be giving us a little bit. And then we're going to have a round for participants to give their questions, comments, ideas, and for them to just listen for a little bit. And then once they have a sense of how some of this is landing for you, they'll be back and they're going to be here the whole time, but they'll be back on stage and be responding to questions and delving further on where they see there's interest to hear more deeply from. So with that, welcome to you, Jenna and Robert. I am so happy you're here, and please kick us off. And we will be hearing from Tom at some point too, giving the co-intelligence lens perspective on this and all that. So it's a little bit of an orchestrated thing, but I'll just fill you in where we are from as we go, if that's okay. Yeah. All right. Jenna and Robert.
Yeah, Robert and I are invited to talk about a very special experience we've made. Martin was also part of this, and Andy also in some ways. Maybe one thing with which I would like to start is a quote that came up during reflections on this process among the team members, the members of the key coordination team that were responsible of designing the process, and that is nobody knows how it works, but because nobody has seen the whole. So nobody knows how it worked because nobody has seen the whole, which also includes us, of course, Hubert and me. So we haven't seen the whole. I haven't seen the whole. Sometimes I wonder, have I been part of this? Sometimes it feels like the whole experience is, I don't know, running through my fingers when I want to pinpoint something that was important during this process. So what I want to do is to throw some of the key some key learnings, maybe just as small seeds. I just want to drop them in the room and then hand over to Robert and then see what plants will spring out of these seeds in our conversation with all of you. So one thing maybe also just as a framing beforehand, we decided to not share slides in this first round where we present the whole process because it has been a very complex thing. We had many layers of design there and we could easily get lost in detail here. So what we decided to do instead is to just like briefly talk about some of the things that are important to us, then hear from you and your questions, and then we will offer answers that might be a little more detailed. The seeds that I would like to drop are fourfold, or maybe it's just 2 dimensions. There's one layer that is about impact and intention. And then one that is about soothing and healing. So impact and intention. We were wondering about what we were actually doing when we did this citizen assembly. What kind of impact were we trying to achieve? And we had in many conversations after the process, we said that something worked here. Something was good about this process. And there was a sense within many of us that have experienced the process that something has moved here, like something changed or shifted maybe. And then on the other hand, there were people that were not very satisfied with the impact that was tangible, maybe. So there's maybe there's one edge that I would like to present to you, which is the edge between something that like an impact that can be felt, something that is happening within us, and then something that is seen out there. And this is an edge that we were feeling on many levels while going through this process, and especially now after the process. So we could talk about a reply that citizens got on their recommendations from, I think, 4 different ministries that took the time to like really give answers to all the recommendations that the citizens had come up with, and say something about like how they would tackle these recommendations and etc. So this might be something impactful. But then on the other hand, there was this sense like, whoa, the politicians, they didn't do anything right now. Like this was a ministry response, and the politicians didn't react up until now. Yeah, so maybe, Robert, why don't you step in here and then.
Yeah, just a few thoughts later. So actually what we try is not to offer you only the top of the iceberg, but maybe some underwater spots. And they're not as easy to grab, you know, because the other stuff you all know, I think, as we were introduced to this circle. So what we found there is in the call for this process, Jenna and me, we met the first time in our life. And that was actually just gives an example how this whole thing works. So there was a team of 30 people whom most of them met the first time for this process. So this was completely new. Some of them were connected and partners, but we connected to something very there. And we were invited to a process which was not really welcome to the Austrian government. That was where I catch up with your idea, Jenna. There was no idea of what could come out of this and how should we deal with that. There was a political pressure when we started that process. And so we were driven into a process at a point where we had actually no long run before the start with the participants. So we had just about 3 months to organize ourselves as a group, to organize the process internally, and there was no idea how to deal with politicians during the process, no idea how to work with the stakeholders, which were really deep in that there should be no big deal coming out of this, and we had no good concept in conversation to the public. So we started from nothing with only a short term of going there. So we were actually driven into a process which had to be iteratively developed. And that was good. That was really actually very good. Because there was no one telling us it's going to work like this. But we started the process as a group of learners and we ended up as a group of learners. And we ended up in imperfection, but with some brilliant moments of collective wisdom, we thought, and with some turns. So we had, and we were very sure that we had to fix our deepest inner purpose at the beginning. So that we did. We had a first circle in the core team about what is our purpose. And Martin I just went through our Miro board and I saw you with the first circle, part of the first circle when we asked about this purpose. And that and there was one thing I remember we were very sure about is, as imperfect as this all starts, we want to make sure that it works and that people really take serious what happens here. If not, we're going to finish before we start. We're not going to take the job. So, and there was this very strong connection which I felt in this team with that. And from there we went step by step through the process. And of course there were lots of things that could have been done very different. And from what you started up, Jenna, was with one idea which I want to point out is the role of the participants was not clear because the role of the politicians was not clear. So there was no deep connection in hold on a second, what you call the assignment, actually. And therefore there was no jar where to put actually the results. And with that, actually, we didn't have the time to design this and to really think about this. And that's a thing which right now, afterwards, in following processes, I really had a deep understanding that we must change must have a shift there, but maybe we go into that. Maybe this is a little bit of a cliffhanger right now, Rosa, and we stop here and we come
Yeah.
later.
So I'd love to reflect back a little bit about what I've heard, and then if you want to add anything to it, or we go into the participant round, right? So, Jenna, when you were starting us off, I heard that there were very many wonderful things that happened, and then there were also people who felt that there was some disappointment, or that there were things that people wished would have happened that didn't. And then what you're saying now, Robert, is just kind of amplifying that, in that you guys, it sounds like you did an amazing job of, with, very little 3-month runway, with not a lot in place, of organizing yourself and organizing the process, etc. And looking back, you're realizing there was not enough clear connection in terms of what was going to happen with the politicians afterwards. And so that affected things. But at the same time, as you said, there were, some very powerful moments of collective wisdom that happened in the process. And also, it sounds like an amazing learning team and learning group that really, came together and learned together and did this iterative process of becoming a group. And as Jenna said at the beginning, this was such a complex process that no one person could really see all of it, right? You were all playing different roles, and yet there was so much coordination between you that it something worked well. And looking back on it, you can say, wow, if we had had longer time or more time to prepare, we could have done more. Is that close? Is there more that you want to add to that before we open it up?
It is close, Rosa. I think it sums up nicely what we've just said. Maybe I would like to add just one more thought, which is more of a question or another edge that I maybe observed, and I would like to put in the middle here, which was about this issue of intention, and it also has to do with the question of impact. The question is, what can we expect to get out of such a process? Is it, do we intend to move something outside of us, or do we intend to move something inside of us? I think that we, as the facilitators who designed the process, some of us were more headed towards one end, and others were more heading towards the other. And I think this was a constant struggle, or struggle is maybe not the right word, but it's a tension that was there and that we were making use of, I think. Somebody recently described such a process as a tablecloth, where different people are pulling in different directions, but somehow it stays stable and moves in one direction. That, like, in the end, it's okay, but like it's still, maybe. I just wanted to put this observation out there and see how you resonate with that, because I'm really very interested in understanding how we can set up intentions with something like a citizen assembly that really serves what its potential, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll just very briefly reflect. Thank you so much. It's a very powerful image of the creative tension created by some of you focusing on inside, the participants having a very meaningful experience, and some of you focusing more on the outside of what is the impact on the world of the outcomes. And both seem to be important, yes. And so it was good that both were there, and at the same time a source of some creative tension. Is that close? Awesome. Okay, so now we are going into the second part of our gathering here, which is just opening it up. What has this stirred for you? And we're going to be making note of it. Jenna and Robert are going to be listening. We're not going to be, even if you have a question, we're not going to be answering it right away, but we're going to be making note of it. And then once we've heard from as many of you as want to speak, within, you know, a reasonably short time frame, about a minute, minute and a half each, so that we can do this next part within, say, a 20-minute time frame. Then they'll have a chance to go deeper and respond to all of your thoughts and comments, or some of your thoughts and comments, and some of them they might say, write us and we'll email you about this, or like that, because this is just the start. This is hopefully the start of a long, productive relationship between Robert and Jenna and CII. So, all right, who would like to go first? Manju, and then Adine. You're on mute, Manju.
God, thanks. I just want to highlight, Jenna, that I really love the way you kicked this off. The fact that you said impact and intention, and then that second aspect of the framing, soothing and healing, which we haven't really talked about yet. But for me, that is very powerful to look at. Impact from the standpoint of the felt sense and the experience that each of the participants have, and those things that are measurable and observable out in the world. And I think there is some kind of potential between those two that I want to see how we can fully tap into, so that people's unique individual experiences, maybe unique, maybe not, and what happens out in the world are explicit and seen, and we recognize the power within these kinds of experiences. And then the other thing that I just wanted to highlight that I heard that it was so exciting for me was the initial role of the participants was not clear, because the initial role of the politicians was not clear. And I think that is such a powerful statement. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Manju. Adine, was it you?
Yeah, I'm picking up a thread that Manju reflected on, and what I heard from Jenna and Robert, along with a reflection I've been doing recently over looking at the many experiments and citizen councils, assemblies, deliberative councils, and whatnot that I have been aware of or been involved with over the last 20 years. And the thing that they all have in common, I've noticed, and I was a little disappointed to hear that your experience here is the same, is that there was a general sense of energy, excitement, good results by participants and organizers, and yet translating their outcomes to some action in their communities, or through the governance process that might need to act on these things, dies. There's, even if there's a response that's, oh, that was fun, that was interesting, thank you, you did a good job, but we're really not going to do anything about it.
Thank you so much, Adine. That is a real concern. I personally think it's a little too early to tell whether that is in fact the case with this or not, because it was just completed a little while ago. But certainly the response.
Well, that was going to be my question: is what is the is there going to be follow-up, or what kind of expectation is there for
Awesome.
moving it forward into some kind of impact?
Yes, thank you so much. That's a very powerful and needed question. Thank you. Martin?
I just want to maybe mention something I heard from Jenna. There was one reflection meeting during the process, at the end of the process on the last weekend, and a few members of the design team met, and I think it was about what is the difference between what Jenna experienced in the German citizen assemblies. There were 2 German citizen assemblies. I think, Jenna, you were both part of, and the Austrian one. And there was one, I thought this was really interesting in the sense that as a facilitator, there's a certain danger that you want to create a great design also that it can be recognized from the outside as a great design. So you have a certain agenda. And at the same time, you have the whole process. And the question was, do we follow this fancy design, or do we kind of go and learn with the process and always keep our mind open for what's needed now? And I think that was, something that was a key decision during the process that the whole group was always struggling a kind of with, and in the sense at one point said, no, we're going to go with what's needed now and forget about our vein and whatever it is. And I thought that was a very important part, and might be just adding to what Jenna said. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Martin, for bringing that up. Very important point. This creative tension between, do we follow the plan or are we flexible? Yeah, and responding to the needs of the moment. Charlie, you're up next.
Great, thank you so much for putting all this together. Yeah, I'll try to bundle maybe two parts in a question. Maybe if there's quick comments or maybe any takeaways on the bigger picture of delegation versus sortition. Are they mutually exclusive? Did it feel like something moved in the right direction, like this felt sense, toward a less mediated participatory governance? So that's like a broad, inviting quick comments there. And then leaning into a little bit what Robert, you were sharing about, and also relating to Adine's question about moving forward in terms of the jar. Robert, you used this word about where to put the results, and there was no time to design or think about this. So I'm curious, this is a big part of my work, as some of you know, like thinking about what I've called community gardening and harvesting. And and I think it also relates, Martin, to the film that you made, and maybe you could offer any quick thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Charles. Yeah, they will be hearing and responding to your questions when they go next, which is still in a little bit. And I just want to remind people that you're also welcome to use the chat. So yes, Charlie just asked, could you type your question in the chat? Adine, if you want to throw your question in the chat as well, so you can verbalize it, and I think it will help presenters if you also write it in. Next person, James.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Jenna and Robert. It seems to me that you put a lot of courage into this process, and I'd like to celebrate that. Secondly, I was very touched when Jenna used the words healing and soothing. I don't think I've ever heard the word soothing in relation to a political process before. And I think that's a wonderful word and worth bearing in mind if it can be something that we see as a valuable outcome. Third, I would be interested in a few facts about the Climate Assembly. I really don't know very much about it at all. And fourth, I do think that sometimes we should not be too worried about what the politician's reaction is. There is a valid view of political change, which is that it starts from the bottom up.
Wow, Thank you for that so much, James, right? Like, what is our criterion of success? Is it looking at what's happening at the top with the politicians, or is it looking at what's happening with the people? Thank you. Are you complete? Is there more? Okay, awesome. All right, anyone else who would like to? We're just about at the time where the presenters are going to be responding to some of this. And there's also some people who haven't asked a question or made a comment. So we have a little bit of time here if you'd like to go.
I would like to speak. Trouble figuring out
I'm
how to
sorry.
raise my hand. Is that working?
Was that Kavana? Yes.
Yes. Sorry. And I was in the middle of typing up my question, but then I thought, oh, if it's the last chance, I better just say it out loud, even though I haven't finished typing it yet. I have two questions. One is similar to the one that was just asked. Just as someone who doesn't know much about this particular event, I would appreciate simply hearing more of the story of it, a bit of an overview. And then my other question that I was in the middle of formulating and trying to type up is something like, presuming that the overall goal here is to vastly scale up the societal response to the climate crisis, what was learned from this event about how to do that?
Oh, great, Kavana. So what was learned about scaling up, and your first question about a request for a little bit of an overview. So I just want to take a moment and welcome Heather and say that you're right in time, because even though Robert and Jenna have already spoken, they're about to speak again, informed by some of the questions that have been here. And so Charles is helping me out, saying Jennifer's hand was up also. And Ethan, you put a wonderful question in here. Would you like to give voice to it? And, or if not, I'm happy to read it. Either way.
Sure. Is that my turn?
Yeah.
I was thinking that in the cases where it seemed like mini publics began to take root, or systems of mini publics began to take root, often the very first exercise in an area didn't have an awful lot of a plan or a lot of success with politicians, but they sort of leveraged the engagement in the community to have local people and representative people able to sort of spread the word about it, and it was sort of used, and many of these systems also sort of ended up having sort of more agenda setting councils that play a higher level, like in the Belgian model or in Paris, and I believe to some extent in Ireland too, and even in just in the Citizens Initiative review. So I think it's often great to when rather than thinking the politicians are going to listen to the conclusion of a really sort of pioneering implementation, it's often great to think of how they can be used as leverage points to create more. So I'm interested in any sort of discussion that was had on that level of how to propel more of these from the first one.
Awesome, Ethan. Thank you so much. And what you had written was, is there any discussion engaging participants in spreading awareness of mini publics, right? So how to leverage this, and seeing the participants as a really wonderful resource as well. And you can expand on your question in the chat if you'd like. Okay, so Jennifer, do you have a comment on what Robert and Jenna shared already before we go into their second round?
Yeah, I mean, I put my question in the chat, but I was really interested in what you said about we had no idea how to deal with politicians and stakeholders and the public, and you were working on figuring that out as you went. And I'm just really curious with the benefit of what you've learned from this process, how you might engage with those groups differently, or start the process differently with those groups, and to what end, to what aim.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And Sita, you also put a question in the chat. Would you be willing to read it and give voice to it?
Yeah, I was just noting that, the 3-month window of organizing and self-organizing, just the huge amount of human energy and time that goes into this work, and the comment around being open and adaptive to what's needed in a moment, and not and maybe borrowing or using things that have already been proven to work in different contexts. So I'm just curious, so what if you imagine, what would facilitate the ease in some of that, or is it necessarily a long and heavy process in a way, because it's also working on the team who's doing the work itself also. So just sitting with some questions related to that.
Awesome. So I think at this point, it would be great to have give you guys a chance to respond to all that you have stirred up here amongst participants. So we'll be doing that now. You'll have about another 15 minutes, give or take, for a response to all of this. And then 15, 20. And then after that, we'll be hearing from Tom, and then we'll have a second round of participant responses. So over to you, Jenna and Robert.
And maybe it's the time to share some pictures to share also with that the process and some of the atmosphere. And maybe you start, if you want to start, Jenna, just describing a little bit, and I start sharing my screen and go roughly, briefly through it.
Yes, let's do that and provide some basic facts, as it was called for by some of you. Maybe. Okay, yeah, now we can see it. So what you're going to see now is slides that we used in the end on the last weekend of a 6-weekend process to do a quick look back with the participants to remind them of the journey that we had just completed together. So this is also why the slides are in German. We're aware that you will probably not be able to read it, but we just wanted to give you an idea because there's many nice pictures in these slides. So here's the process very basically. 6 weekends, 100 people were selected randomly from all over Austria in a two-layered process. So one random selection, and then the aim to build a sample that is more or less representative of the population and with regards to some social demographic facts. And these 100 people came together in person 6 times, as I said. So this would be weekend 1, where they were just meeting and feeling very lonely, maybe because they knew nobody, and maybe it was very strange. And then we also heard some basic facts about climate change and actually the whole ordeal of it. So there we had scientists involved heavily in this process, heavily meaning that there was a council of scientists who or a board maybe that helped provide the basic facts, but also were there to answer questions that citizens came up with later and provide feedback and all of this. So there was a very strong involvement of scientists, and we also observed a very strong personal commitment they developed through working with citizens on this intimate level. And especially like this was maybe part of the iterativeness. We involved them on personally, we involved them more and more. And once we also opened the floor, or opened the circle of the facilitators to the scientists, a whole new, dimension of interaction between scientists and citizens was achieved. So this is maybe an interesting thing to know. Yeah, Robert, yes. Go ahead.
And as we, when planning the first weekend, we're very sure that when people like these were invited with the basic information how deep we are in trouble in this world, that might cause a kind of group depression at the very beginning. And we were very sure that we have to confront them very, very soon with these information, but therefore we also answered with 2 core ideas that the people meeting there for the first time, they gave themselves a goal which intention do we set to the whole process? Like Rosa did this the same thing in a very small circle with us before meeting this evening or this morning for you. This afternoon, it's 1 o'clock, I think, or I don't know. But anyhow, we did this in like collecting intentions from the group, and out of this, we designed or worked on a core intention for the whole group, as well as some pictures for the good future. So we gave them some view. If we would manage to really work well with that, what we do here, what would the best be that could come out of this? And we also invited people to really, like you see on the left-hand side, pictures, and give them some idea that this is not only to be spoken about, but it's also to find through the whole 6 weeks, we also have to connect to deeper levels of feelings. And there was a first invitation to that, maybe. And now I maybe from there on, we should make it maybe a little bit more faster for you. But first weekend was also with this intention and with that goal. What are we asked? On which topics would you like to ask before before we hand you the topics from all the professionals, from all the university guys, and so we asked them what are your basic intentions, and from there we started weekend 2. And of course we didn't work in a group of 100, but we spread into smaller groups with fancy names, and every smaller group then worked on specific smaller parts, smaller topics, smaller questions, and then we had a ritual on every weekend sharing on a marketplace what happened, and with that sharing we ask people what is there, what has to be added, which questions do we have to go deeper in it, and when going to last weekends and finalizing finalizing the advice, it was also that we asked what are your core, was heißt Widerstände, your core
concerns.
Yeah.
Concerns. Thank you, Martin. Your core concerns, and so with this marketplace, we try to get the concerns as soon as possible into the process, so that it was possible to build up a field that was able to consent at the end of the process. Maybe you, Jenna, from there.
Yeah. Well, I think we had a lot of input from citizens in the middle of the process. So this is what's happening here, and then the different smaller groups were starting to work in various ways, which I will probably not outline and describe now. I'm a bit like, well, so yeah, well, this is interesting. On weekend 4, we invited a couple of stakeholders from different, like from the Chamber of Agriculture to the association that works on the needs or interests of disabled people. Like, so there were different stakeholders invited, and they were entering into discussion with the citizens. Citizens were asking them questions. They had prepared papers beforehand that citizens could read. So this was interesting and informing the process. And then also on weekend 4, we also had politicians coming in. So all of the parties represented in the Austrian parliament were present. Somehow it was not all, they were not all in the first, well, whatever, they were present. Let's just leave it there. And that was interesting. Like to some people, that was really, that this was a huge deception, and then to others, this was a huge, not a huge success, but it was an interesting impulse that got like some movement into the field. So, but the interesting aspect here is that we invited politicians to experience the process themselves, I think. So yeah, we harvested some of the insights here. There was also this interesting aspect about polis. So we, after the fourth weekend, we put out a survey to all of the Austrians out there with the idea of informing the process further. But here's the learning. That was, well, maybe we now what I realize now I'm talking, but I'm also like, I don't know, maybe you've noticed that before, but now I have like my second layer brain is telling me now I think we're diving into too much detail and not focusing on the questions. So maybe, yeah, maybe just
Jenna, maybe I just can add, there's a case study that Andy wrote that gives a pretty much nice overview of the whole process.
Yeah.
So you can, I think, so people ones who would like to look at the detail, and you wrote much of the process design, and we translated that into English into the case study. So I think that could be a nice resource for the detailed design and over the weekends. And then, and then we can go to the questions. Maybe that's a help. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Jenna, go for it.
I just have one more reflection on what is happening now inside of me, and I think it's representative, or it can be representative of one aspect that was also present in the process. Because what was happening now, sharing the slides, is the wish to, or maybe I also experienced the wish to present, or to present something that will help you grasp the whole of the process, which is not possible, of course. And we are also trying to get all of the facts on the table and all of this. And I think what sometimes happened in this process is that we got lost in information somehow. So just, I don't know, adding a layer of observation here. Robert, you wanted to add something?
To just grab some of your questions in the short time, as we didn't have actually, as we weren't asked actually for the results from the politicians, there was a process going on behind the whole process with the participants, and that was that a team of our core team worked with the pub regulation very much in different layers. So they from weekend to weekend they called politicians, went to them, talked to them, and asked them, how would you like to involve and how can we share what we're doing? And that was how they actually were invited to weekend 4. When we started, that wasn't clear at all. There was no one of them who wanted to come. So there was a lot of work going into that. And one insight that I really took out of that is that as there was no interest, and actually the idea of a lot of the politicians to show us what we call in German a cold shoulder, not responding at all. There was a real good idea from our pub regulation team. They said, okay, if the politicians on the government layer, they don't react and respond, then we still have the local politicians. So what we did and what they did, and which was actually a brilliant step, and I just shared another thing with you, which is the internet. You can see the participants, and underneath you can find all their local politicians from their villages, the mayors, and they were invited to small interviews. And how do you feel about your guy being part of the climate assembly? And so we had politicians from all Austrian parties from all over Austria saying that's great that they're there, and yes, we want to hear what they say. And so the pressure to the government was built up. And with these local politicians, they went up to the regional politicians and said, okay, there's my mayor, and now I want to go to the regional politician. And so they build up circles and circles and circles. And at the end, which wasn't clear at all, the participants could hand the outcome to really the ruling government, and that was really a great deal, starting from nothing, ending up there. But still, and there is a learning in it, we're not too fancy about this. And that's why, and why? It's because there is something I really had to learn, and people like Jenna said in our team, they would not think the same as I do. But we have a great thing about the difference between, are we heading to recommendations from citizens to politicians and as ministry, or are we on the actually better in heading to heed good advice, which is something completely different. We're in the last two weekends, there was a group of the citizens. They built up an own organization to continue in monitoring if administration and politicians follow their recommendation, but that's not their job. So actually, there is a very powerful idea of Selbstwirksamkeit, of giving them
efficacy, I think, is that?
Yeah, so that's right. Self-efficacy, self-empowerment.
Okay. Yes, but actually, if we want to deal with these big topics, we have to think from those who want to work with the results, and they don't want to have another powerful opponent, but they rather can deal with good advices and then for themselves decide, okay, which of these good advices are we going to heed? I don't know if you see it's a small step, but it changes. It is a big shift for the participants as well as for the politicians, as well as for us as hosts. In which is the empowerment we give them?
So Robert, if I can reflect and try to understand, because I'm sensing the power here and I'm not sure it's totally clear to me. So just in case some further clarification would be helpful to others as well. So you talked about this groundswell of how the politicians at the state and national level were motivated by all this wonderful outreach that was done to local politicians and how that created the pressure and interest that at the beginning wasn't there. But then you were saying that there was this real important shift and that not everybody is on the same page still, but on the one side is the outcome of this recommendations to politicians, or the second one is, are we giving them good advice for them to heed? Is that the distinction? I mean, I'm not quite sure what the difference is between giving a recommendation and giving good advice.
If you give a recommendation, then in the German language, it's like saying this would be the best to do. And now we're really on spotting on you whether you do it or not. Giving them recommendation, good recommendation, refers that they really are in a big job and not very easy job. and then and referring to their role, which is of course in our democracies it's how do you say, it's respecting their role. Maybe it's the best to say that. And if we want to change things, I think we have always share respect in person and role to where people are, and recommendations undermine this respect in a way,
Okay.
and
So
therefore
basically,
not open to reconnect with the results.
So what you want in this distinction is to offer an invitation that is more respectful and collaborative. Is that close?
Where people invited to these processes, as well as politicians, as well as administrative people, they feel like they're working on the same field and not their opponents.
Yes. Yes. So they're not opponents, they are working together. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe, Rosa, if that would be okay, I would just add one more layer to this thought. Is that still?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Because Robert was just saying it in a brief sentence in this whole in this whole idea that there is an association that the citizens, the participants, they decided to form an association to follow up on their recommendations, just to make that clear again. But the thing is now, and this is about impact and intentions again, I think, this association is actually falling apart because they are trying to do something which they don't have the power to do, which is to make these recommendations be followed up by politicians. Like they really, like they took this as their purpose. And this is too much for them. And it's even breaking what good the experience of the citizen assembly did to their inner I don't know, to whatever shifted within them with regards to how they wanted to be active and change something, and with regard to climate change, or how a societal response to climate change. And now they are making this whole experience of self-efficacy gets maybe blown apart by their purpose of trying to see the recommendations through. So, and this is a danger, I think, that we have, that we only realized afterwards, because we didn't, this is a framing that I think we did throughout the whole process, that we are trying to build these recommendations that politicians will have to follow. And this is a framing we repeated and repeated. And we just later, I think we understood how, not helpful would be the lowest level of estimation I would give this was.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Ethan is saying something about internal and external impact, and I think this may be a different way of slicing the pie, because we're still talking about external impact, but do we want the external impact to be that now we're trying to make politicians do something, or that we are inviting greater partnership with politicians? I think that's what I'm hearing. And you're acknowledging that not being clear about this distinction beforehand led to a lot of language being used that then kind of supported this thing of this group is going to try and impose these recommendations. And Manju is asking, how does change really happen after an assembly, which is really interesting, right? Because we all have different theories of change, and oftentimes we're thinking that we're going to make change one way, and the way change actually happens may be different. But I don't want to go too much longer now without giving our beloved founder, Tom Atlee, a chance to speak. Tom is going to be offering us some examples of how he sees co-intelligence at work here already. And Andy is going to be screen sharing with us the Wise Democracy Pattern Language cards that go along with Tom's insights about what he's already seeing here. And then also Tom will be offering a couple of ways that maybe the growing edge of, if we were to do this again, which patterns might be helpful as we iteratively learn and grow and learn to do things even better next time.
Whoa. It's funny because I went over, because I knew a bunch about the Citizen Assembly already. I went over and made a list of patterns that I thought probably would be involved. In my commentary, I was supposed to pick 2 or 3 kind of thing, but there's so many. This conversation has kind of blown my approach apart because we're dancing at the edge of much bigger understandings. To have a pattern to Andy, you can put up generative interactions, I guess, but this is what I'm seeing has and what's been talked about has lifted me out of seeing this as an example of a mini public, because it is already, there's so much going on within and around the edges of the concept of mini public that you guys have innovated or are on the edge of. It goes into my bigger visions of the whole system in the room, the whole system in the conversation is another one. Generative interactions, the whole system in a conversation of generative interactions towards shared understanding. That's 3 patterns. And ideally, what you want from the whole public stakeholder government response is a shared understanding of what's needed, and that the actions come out of the shared understanding rather than the power dynamics and pressures. That's the ideal. And it feels like what you guys have done is is starting to play with the prototype. I mean, you've done experiments with how to engage more people, like through your starting with the local politicians kind of thing. But it feels like there's something about, I want to get back to my notes here. There's something about the directions you're going. And in the background is that what you're doing is learning. You're framing this as a learning thing of the iteration, another pattern is creative experimentation, and that you're trying things out. The whole experimentation, you're trying things out, seeing what's there. But I'm pointing towards wherever you have a part of the system that is not in the conversation, you can expect resistance. To the extent to which you include different stakeholders, different power holders, public, whatever, to the extent that you include the different players in what needs to happen, you will get shared understanding rather than resistance. So it feels like I'm seeing, from my theoretical and visionary benefit, I'm looking at what you've done as breaking out of what's happening is we are getting a bunch of citizens to represent a citizen voice and giving it to the government. That's the basic principle of a mini public, and doing the random selection, et cetera. And I go, well, what means do we have to engage the larger public? What broader means? You brought in stakeholders, but they're largely as sources of information and response rather than as participants in a generative dialogue. What happens when government officials are considered part of the stakeholders? If the stakeholders are everybody who has a stake or who is a player in what's happening, how do you bring more of that into a generative conversation? And suddenly the citizen, the mini public becomes a part of a larger system. And what are the different interactions between those different parts of the system? So I'm seeing this as the fact that you are starting with the mini public model and testing the edges of that model, both internally and how the mini public is organized, and externally and what happens, what kinds of impact it's having, and that your testings are moving towards inclusion, including more viewpoints, including more kinds of potential engagement, the sense of agency that the participants had, that you were tapping and that the people who made the association afterwards were tapping. And again, their failure of agency, to me, their sense of failure and coming apart, is because they didn't have the big vision of what we need is ideally everybody, all the players in the conversation. And for them to see that what piece they are doing in moving towards that. There's many pieces that could be, there's a lot of stakeholder dialogue, stakeholder collaboration, experimentation going on right now, totally separate from the citizen engagement. It's like, how to weave that? There's a citizen stakeholder integration pattern. There's another pattern on inclusive stakeholder governance. What happens when you actually do include all the stakeholder views and interests? So I'm feeling you are juicing up the evolution of what goes on in a mini public and citizen assembly.
Wonderful.
And you are juicing the edges where that could expand into including more and more and more different kinds of people in the conversation. And so the question, who else should be involved, feels like the next lesson point for what, if you were to take this further and further and further, it'd be who else should be involved and how. And that's just an innovative track. It doesn't have an answer. There's no final answer to that. That's a direction to learn into creatively. Check.
Thank you so much, Tom. I am so jazzed by your excitement, and I'm just going to underline some of what you said, that you feel that what Robert and Jenna have shared is giving you the sense that they're exploring at the edges of what this whole mini public thing is, and in a very expansive way, to include more and more segments of society into it in different ways. And Charles, yes, direct quote, juicing up the evolution of what goes on in a mini public, and you're juicing the edges to expand who should participate in the conversation. So juicing, I don't know how that translates into German, but like, making juice, making good juice. So, all right, so awesome. So we are now due for a participant round. You've heard a second round from the presenters. You've heard now Tom's co-intelligent bubbling away. And if anybody, and some of you have been putting really, really good questions into the chat. And if you want to speak those questions or comments or insights into the center, and then we will have a last closing response from Robert, Jenna, and Tom, kind of in conversation with each other after we do this round. Andy, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna and Robert. It's been really interesting. And yeah, I really find this last question of sort of how do you create a whole system conversation is really very, very interesting. And I think there's something for me, the thing that resonates here for me is like, it's sort of where we started about creating this amazing sort of relational field where the felt sense, the experience of the participants was really important. And I guess there's a question there that comes up for me now is like, how do we bring the politicians and the stakeholders into that same sort of where they can drop their roles and drop their guards and have that sense of shared humanity in these spaces? I think that's a big question, and it's not an easy one at all, because obviously their roles and the power, that positions that they have, and the defensiveness and all that. But I think there's something to be explored there around next steps. But yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. I just want to say, I apologize. This is not just for questions. The questions are what resonates for you. So if something really spoke to you, you can please speak that. And what are you learning and what questions do you have, right? Or whatever else. And we will be brief so that as many people as possible can share. Martin, I believe you were next, and then Cannoli.
There was a question earlier. I just want to maybe add, and we'll give maybe a short overview. The association basically got a response from the ministries, 6 ministries, and that was what's already happening on the ground. What is EU, what is local, what is state level, what is national level. That's the answer of the ministries. The political answer is still open. That's the next round. So the woman federal minister for climate action, she's going to connect the association or the representatives of the association, a few members, with Martin Kocher. He's of the right party, so he's part of the party that is also kind of resisting taking up the results, but he's very open. So the political response is still open. That's one. As Ethan said, on the local level, state level, these members are meeting the local authorities, state authorities. They're still on an ongoing basis. What they have now is, maybe this is new, they always have the option to take a scientist with them, because they have the private numbers of the scientists, and because they can't give the specifics, as a scientist can, so they just call up a scientist and say, would you come along and have a meeting with the state governor? That is something that happened here. That was a really close connection between the members and the scientists during the whole process. That was not only that the scientists gave their talks, in the evening they spoke to the members, often 2 to 3 hours after dinner, asking questions and so forth. So there was kind of a bonding that created over this 5 or 6 weekends. So I think I just wanted to add that is still happening. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Martin. Cannoli, you're up next.
Cannot hear you right now.
Sorry about that. I got logged in late. I'm sorry. I've kind of been lurking here, but I was inspired and sort of motivated to say something by the last things that Tom said about making the distinction between consultative and participative. And I spent about 20 years of my life doing large group process design and running stuff, and was largely inspired early on by Kathy Dannemiller and Marv Weisbord with Future Search. Kathy Dannemiller with her large group process. She was kind of the grandma of really large group process in this country. And Kathy's approach was partly participative, but largely consultative. And Future Search was very directly focused on participative approach. And we did a whole lot of thinking about this, and we were originally inspired by some work that my partner did at Stanford on American democracy and the whole issue that Thomas Jefferson and other people raised at the founding, which was that the Constitution in this country essentially created, at best, a consultative relationship to public participation in government through the election of representatives to actually do the actual governing. So Americans don't have much experience of direct governance. They have an experience of going to the polls and voting for people, which I think is pretty much happens around the world. But I think that from my experience and seeing how things worked in practice with people around the world, and we organize things all around the world, these large group stuff, is that the concept of participative is absolutely critical. If everybody isn't seen as having a voice, and if everybody who's brought in from elected officials to funders to agency people to politicians and even police and that kind of thing, if everybody isn't brought in as a participant, the conversation is very, very different. And it's not it's not magical how you do that. In fact, although it's not that sophisticated or difficult either, I think the big problem is that we don't think like that. We are kind of used to thinking that some people have the access or right to participation and other people don't. And that I notice in our meetings, public meetings in the United States and in you know, city council meetings and other meetings where elected officials involved, you know, the elected officials play a totally different role than everybody else. And we had some experience working with the state where we worked with state commissions where normally that's the way things would be done. But when we set up the commission, we let anybody who wanted to join the commission. So there weren't commissioners and then the public. So, and then when we ran meetings, everybody was involved as a participant. And we looked at mundane things, even like the cleaning up of leaky underground tanks in that way. And it changed things tremendously. And one of the things that is that when everybody was a participant, the log jams stopped happening. The polarizations where people got locked up in seeing it this way or that way, they just didn't happen. And when things were set up so that some people were participants and some people were not, then those log jams happened because the people that were not participants but wanted to be had to do something to stop the process and freeze it up and seize it in order to gain some power and to actually have a voice. But when that was changed and everybody had the same voice, there wasn't the need for those kind of power battles. And I think, you know, that's an issue in terms of design and practicality, but it's also an issue in terms of how one thinks about everything. We've all internalized ways of thinking, and I think, you know, it's very, very difficult bringing people together with all the different sort of internalized assumptions about the roles that they might play or what they need to do to gain, you know, a voice. And, you know, Saul Alinsky was a early organizing champion in this country, and what he was all about was organizing people to do things to throw a monkey wrench in the machine, because until that happened, they felt like they didn't really have a voice. It was a matter of creating some kind of power equity. And you can talk about power equity and stuff like that, but I think that goes away. That whole issue of power goes away when everybody becomes the participant. And it's both complicated and not so complicated to do that, but it's possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cannoli, for your voice of experience in deeply participatory processes. Cannoli has been associated with the Co-Intelligence Institute for a long time. Really glad to see you becoming more connected recently. I've missed you a lot. And one of the things that I said to Jenna and Robert is that I'm envisioning this presentation that they're giving as the beginning of their longer term connection with Co-Intelligence Institute and with all of us. So I really hope that, you know, these conversations continue to happen.
One quick little thing I just want to add. I helped teach a class at Stanford, and one of the people that was in the class was this guy who was planning to go back to Austria and become the prime minister of Austria. And I can't remember his name. I wish I could. And I asked him if he had heard about Jim Ruff's process that was done in Austria. And he says, oh yeah, that was some conservative party that was trying to do that, right? And but Austria has always been really interesting to me because it seems like people in Austria, you know, are kind of have some arrogance that we don't have here, that you could actually organize, you know, a nationwide conversation. And it may have to do with size, but for me, Austria has always been a kind of special place to learn something from.
Awesome. Thank you, Cannoli. Heather, you're up next.
Yes, I want to apologize also for coming late. I put the Eastern Standard Times on my calendar, so thank you, Jennifer, for rattling my cage. I am just completely triggered in my physiology in this conversation because it is so relevant to the work that I've been doing on the ground here in Clark County, Washington. The city of Vancouver just completed its climate action framework planning process, and the climate action framework was passed by City Council on Monday, December 5th. And this was a stakeholder process in which I tried to suggest a citizen climate council as part of the process and didn't get any traction. Clark County, the county government is now beginning the process of its comprehensive plan update, which is to create a vision for the future along the lines of the goals stated in the Washington State Growth Management Act, for which there is not yet a climate goal. We've tried twice in the last 2 legislative sessions to get a goal approved by the state legislature, have come close but not succeeded. The conversation that has erupted over the 18 months of the City of Vancouver's attempt to have a participative stakeholder process for the design of its climate action framework has revealed in stark relief the dominant culture influences and the extent to which communities of color are disinterested in participating because they see these, what we're calling participative processes, as performative and not really empowering. So there's a conversation going on right now in every room I'm in, because I'm determined to be the squeaky wheel around all this, is that my experience has been that having a voice doesn't equal having influence. And, you know, we're getting better at creating spaces for marginalized communities of color to have some experience of generating a voice in a participative way, but they are not feeling like it actually gives them any influence or any power. I was in a call yesterday with the director of our county's community planning department, who is going to be managing the comprehensive plan update process, who has admitted more than once that county government has done a very bad job of including marginalized communities of color in these conversations, and that he and his public participation staff are willing and eager to listen to anybody who has any ideas about how to do it better this time around. For me personally, the topic that we are on today is that opportunity that I would like to incite my county government to address and embrace. So I am so excited to hear all this. My adrenaline is rushing, and my question is, how is the best way to kind of like sell this process to a county government, the elected government, who does not want to share power with citizens, and try to bring forward the desire of the planning department, who actually wants to give it a try in a way that the county staff doesn't feel like they're taking a step too far, and that they're going to be protected. The conversation where we left it yesterday was, is there a way that we can look at the IAP2 spectrum of public participation and somehow figure out a way to get our planning departments to move out of the inform realm of the IAP2 spectrum, where we get told what they're going to do to us? And where are some small steps along the way towards the empowerment part of that spectrum? And how might a citizens' climate assembly be an example of a step towards genuine empowerment by marginalized communities in a dominant culture context in which the marginalized communities do not feel like this is just another performative exercise which will make no difference in their daily lives?
Thank you so much, Heather. I appreciate your question. I would encourage you to write it down. It's a very powerful question. It is a slightly different context in Austria than in the US. And it's very much a valid question. And just briefly, I want to say that some people here I've heard talking about how one small step is making the proportional representation not exactly to the proportion in the larger society, but weighing it so that there's even more participants from disadvantaged communities in the microcosm, so that to kind of begin to make up for the historical exclusions. So I don't have the references on me, but I will look for those to send to you. Next person, Ethan.
I was interested to hear whether this conversation about everyone as a participant and how much can we embrace that framing. I'm interested in the extent to which there could be cost to that, in the sense that some of my understanding, and I have less experience with this than probably most everyone on the call, but my understanding is that often participants, by being given such a serious role, bring more energy to the process, more focus. And there was recently an experiment in England where too many publics were done on the east and west side of a town, and as I understand it, the only difference was one major difference was politicians went to one. And I haven't seen a sort of scholarly write-up of the event, but one of the participants from the section that had politicians participating mentioned how a lot of the sampled participants started quickly kind of deferring to politicians when there was less delineation between their roles in the process, and that there were kind of, this may not be something that applies to something as large as climate change, when everyone feels, they're not necessarily going to defer to their local council person on that, whereas I believe these in England were about some sort of local issue. But this question about the value of the delineation of the roles is something I'd be interested to hear, and whether participants in the in this particular mini public did sort of defer in ways to politicians, or if their participation changed. And I am going to have to drop off very soon, but I just wanted to say thank you before I go, and we'll listen to any responses that I miss afterwards in the recording.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ethan, for your question. It's a very important one. How do we not have a situation where people are deferring to people of higher status when we bring those together? I'm sure that Robert and Jenna may have some good experiences to offer, since they, a scientist also has more status than a person who isn't one. And so I'm just really curious what the experience of helping to, as some people say, level the playing field was. And thanks for joining us. And yeah, I'm really glad we have a recording so you can hear what comes next. Okay, so unless we have more hands, we're about to bring this back over to Robert and Jenna, and this time with Tom. So Jenna and Robert first, but also then Tom responding in. So I think we've heard from everybody who had a hand raised. Is there going once? Going twice? Is there anybody who wants to say a little bit before we move it over? Okay, I see a thumbs up from Kevin. Okay, back to you, Robert and Jenna. Yeah?
Oh, Rosa, I just want to say something really quick. It's not super important,
sorry.
Jenna and Robert, I just want to share with you two of my major takeaways from today. Jenna, back at the very beginning with your comments about an inner change, right? And then the bigger change. And I just really want to create a graphic of what it looks like for an individual to have a change, and then have that ripple out into that broader change. It's just a really quick way to show that. I mean, we all know this, but there's just something really potent about the way you described that in the beginning. And that kind of correlates to, Robert, with that page, that web page is such a graphical takeaway for me of each of the individuals, and then each of the local government people is just another thing of scale. So I just wanted to share that, and those are two major takeaways for me. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I thought you were doing thumbs up for move forward. I didn't realize you wanted to speak. I'm so glad you spoke, and thank you so much for that. Okay, Jenna and Robert with Tom. What comes up for you as you hear participants' inputs? And also, you haven't spoken since Tom gave his input. So what came up for you hearing Tom's co-intelligence take in all this?
Listening to all of you, I first of all want to say thank you for putting this into another framework, and maybe it's like first of all I want to reckon that there's two Germans talking about a process in Austria. So we're not Austrians. We're also like stepping into a culture which is familiar to ours, but which is very different. The political culture in Austria is also different to ours and to what our experience is. But if we like what I listen to now invites me to the picture to step out even further and not look at the one process, but on actually the bigger picture of development in this kind of work we all do. And for this, actually, what we did was like I sometimes call this a proof of existence. So people can handle a process like this. Actually, when we were invited to that, the Austrian government, they didn't really believe that anybody would take this card and really play it. And so there was no invitation to talk with stakeholders. There was no invitation to talk with politicians. There was even no invitation to invite these kind of Wissenschaftler, Entschuldigung, scientists in the way we did. So we didn't have a field where we could like get them in a room all together, because actually there was from the right beginning there was actually the intention of politicians as well as from administration as well as from stakeholders was to what some of them wanted, and we knew that the power would have been that they come together and talk together and explore and develop together, and so from what I started off, I think what we have in Germany to maybe compare with that is a quite comparable process that we started with the first citizens assembly throughout all Germany, which was actually not meant to have any outcome. It was just meant to be done. And the pivotal point at this with this one is that the topic is not only to be done, the topic has to be solved. But I think there were so many experiences, especially what you, Jenna, pointed out, and you, Martin, pointed out, in connecting scientists with the participants, with the citizens, and some of the politicians and some of the administration as well got in touch with this connection. So there might, from a higher level, I think if they invite a next time, they will be open to, okay, we have to do a design which starts much further and which ends much later. So we can draw the bigger picture, but we weren't invited to do that. We came into the process and they also already said, there's 6 weekends, these are the 100 people you have, and now go for it. finish. And there was not even a door, a tiny little bit open to invite others to this. But we have now this proof of existence that it is worth doing it. And now what we can do is we broaden this Spalt, this angle, where like you, Canoli, described in my work, it's just the same. If I start and then I'm invited to processes, especially here in Lindau with my local government, and people ask me to do something, I say I only come when you're willing to invite everybody as human beings, and you invite the whole systems. If not, I will not work for you. So that's the same with me. But on this higher level, if we develop countries and not local administries or local politician things, if we try to redesign an understanding how a country can work, we have to fasten ourselves down and to have the bigger picture. Okay, we're still now our foot is in the angle, and there it will stay, and these seeds will grow.
Thank you, Robert. Jenna?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm exhaling because it's been such a dense conversation, and I can sense that we're also we've been developing a thought around this need for a whole system conversation. This is something that really stood out to me. And yeah, I think the thinking process about how are we going to do this, how are we going to see this happen, is just starting, because it's actually a shift. Like, we're not talking about bringing citizens to a place and having them dialogue around a topic and then, I don't know, building recommendations or advice or whatever, but like taking the effort out there from these separate spaces to something that is larger and involving everyone. So I really like this shift in perspective, and it deeply resonates with, yeah, maybe aspects that I was not able to name as well before. So I just wanted to underline that again. And the other and another thing that is particularly important for me, I've been chewing on this observation for a while, and this has to do with this what Ethan said about deferring responsibility to the people with higher status, being politicians or scientists, as you pointed out, Rosa, and our collective culture of being very used to having leaders solving problems for us, having fathers, yeah, in this term, doing that, and then this being a huge tension at the core of our democracies, that we're still doing that and then calling it democracy. And I think for a while now, we've come to the realization that this is not a model that we can continue to follow. Companies are seeing that the complexities that they are facing cannot be solved with hierarchies of a pyramid, and they are experimenting with collaborative leadership, and there's all kinds of organizations trying to do that. And how are we going to do this on the state level or on the government level? How can we learn to not call on leaders, but be leaders ourselves collectively? So yes, and I guess it has it has a lot to do with offering spaces to make the experience of collaborative leadership, learning how that feels, what kind of potential is in there, where we can lean once we build this space of collaborative leadership. So this is how change is happening on the individual level when we're saying, like, I don't know, I'm also training to be a therapist, so offering people spaces where they can make a new experience themselves differently, something like that. And I think this is something that we are offering, or in these dialogue-based mini publics, and we have to take that to wider, like we have to enlarge the space for experience and making different experiences in this, maybe under the heading of collaborative leadership. I mean, this is the vision that comes up for me now. I'll close here.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Yeah, the powerful, and I just want to point out that there was something you said earlier that resonated with a lot of people about spaces for healing, right? And now you're speaking to that again, about how that experience of being in this kind of group can be very powerfully healing, and I would add transformative, and that whole dimension, which is often not looked at in depth when we're just looking at recommendations, but the whole personal shift. And Kevin had asked before, are we doing some kind of surveys about what are some of the interchanges that people have experienced in this process? I don't know if that happened in Austria or not, but I do think this focus that these processes are very powerful inner and outer experiences both. So thank you so much for that. Tom?
Yeah, so much. I was thinking therapeutic metaphor for this. I thought of making a space where collectives can experience themselves differently. That's part of what we're doing. Not just the individuals in the collective, but the collectives as a whole can experience who they are. Like Jim Ruff likes to talk about, his wisdom council is intended to create a we the people consciousness, to have we the people feel their wisdom and their agency as a collective. The one thing I wanted was inspired somewhat by Heather's description of the marginalized community exclusions, that there are different approaches to taking major kinds of difference that do not mix easily. Like one of the things I saw in a big World Cafe experiment was with the Girl Scouts in the United States, and they had like 1,000 people in this room, a mixture of Girl Scouts and parents and Girl Scout team leaders, kind of. And they started out with conversations with World Cafe tables where all the people at a given table were one of those. So you'd have all the Girl Scout leaders at tables, and you'd have all the parents at tables, all the Girl Scouts at tables, and then there'd be mixed, as there is. Okay. And you have tables that had all three kinds of people at them. And then you go back into what in American politics you call a caucus, go back into your like-minded, people. And so being able to have parallel conversations where there's different kinds of overlaps. You can have links between conversations. Paulus is a really interesting tool for linking between conversations among different kinds of people. All the people in the conversation can be, all the different conversations can be linked to Paulus and responding on Paulus to each other. But in the live conversations, they're actually talking to their fellow citizens. So that's another, the linkage. And I was also part of an open space that had a World Cafe in it. And in that, an innovation of people who were this open space session was so full that we divided it up into several different parts. And then we had delegates going from different parts to go listen in on the other parts. So that's another interesting model. They were sort of volunteer delegates going over and checking out what's going on and reporting back. And also the iteration. Iteration is another way of mixing. If you have results from totally separate conversations, where you then feed in, like for example with Paice, you feed in results from all those conversations into an extension of the conversations. You have one round of conversations and then do a Paice and then take feedback or input from all of those conversations and feed it back into the next level of conversations. And having a fishbowl where a part of the whole is talking in the middle and the whole is watching that, and then another part of the whole is talking in the middle and the whole is watching that. So there's different ways to allow the kinds of, for example, that happen, including marginalized people, to be able to create parallel conversations where you don't have to deal with the power issues in the same way. You don't have to deal with the racial issues in the same way. And then allowing different kinds of interaction to allow the whole to digest whatever is happening.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you want me to stop? Okay.
Well, if you could wrap up, yeah.
There's another way of looking at all these conversations that's not only changing the people in them or coming up with recommendations, but as changing the context within which decisions are made. That happened in the Austrian Citizen Assembly on immigration and migration, where one of the politicians who had wanted to act in certain more inclusive ways, but it was too politically risky, having the Citizen Council allowed him to vote more in an inclusive way because the context had shifted. And the idea of context as an active player in anything that's happening. In Occupy Wall Street, people say, well, Occupy Wall Street didn't achieve anything. Well, it actually did. It brought the image of 1% versus the 99% into the conversation. Before Occupy Wall Street, that particular meme had not entered the conversation. After Occupy Wall Street, it was all over the place. So shifting, reframing conversation is another thing that can happen with these conversational tools.
Thank you. As I said earlier, I'm really looking forward to these conversations continuing amongst everyone here. And I want to switch gears for a moment to have a little official CII message, and then we'll have some closing words. And then after the formal closing at 3, because I really want to respect people's time, we will be keeping the room open so that those of you who want to stay on for a little while longer can still continue to talk with each other. Yeah. So Andy in a moment is going to be helping me out here. We just want to thank you for your presence and let you know we plan to offer these calls on a monthly basis. These are a free event, and at the same time, we really welcome any financial contributions that people can make or other kinds of contributions so that we can keep offering it freely. And we want to make it easy for you to donate. So Andy is putting a link in the chat to our fundraiser page. Yeah. And Sita added some really interesting information. Yeah. We're going to save the chat and send it to everyone because there's some really important information here. Yeah. So, and also if people want to stay in touch, via Eventbrite, we're really not allowed to like add you to our mailing list directly from Eventbrite. So Andy, if you could also put the link to the
Co-Intelligence homepage. So if you're not on the Co-Intelligence mailing list already, please do so. Okay, so any one or two words that people want to offer in closing about what you're taking away with you from this gathering? And we'll start with you, Robert.
I've been doing that work for quite a couple of years, and it feels like since ever I'm just at the beginning, and that's good. I think there's so much to learn, and thank you. I thank you very much, all of you, for all of your resonance, for sharing your insights from the world you come from. I do deeply understand that it's also a matter of different kind of democracies we come from. So there's so much to learn from other countries and other areas of the world, how we really go on, develop democracy and save democracy. Actually, this is a core intention I have. Making democracy again trustable in the world, and therefore there's not that one way. But what I really take from this is there's so many fellows around the world thinking about the same thing, and from their viewpoint having to add so much to what I found yet. And I'm very thankful to be invited to that. Yes.
Thank you so much, Robert. Oops, I'm sorry.
Looking forward to the ongoing conversation, maybe not today, but
looking forward for the ongoing conversation. We are just about out of time. I'm going to ask Jennifer a couple of parting words, and people are welcome to put their comments in the chat if you have any final words of gratitude or appreciation. Yes, Jenna?
Well, I'll just add my words of gratitude, which is what I'm taking with me. Gratitude for a space to reflect with you. I think that's all that I need to say right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Thank you so much, Robert. We welcome anyone who needs to go and anyone who wants to stay and just informally chat. My closing words are thank you and to be continued.